Hi, hello, and welcome to LearnStroke IAS classes by Arjun. We have come to the important IAS current affairs, that's it, editorial summary or editorial analysis for 2024 examination. This is the class 8, and let's discuss the first important editorial right away. And the first one is regarding the spring cleaning, which is actually discussing about GS paper 3, which is actually something to do with economy. You know why? Because it is something to do with economy is since this talks about the GST and the various aspects of GST. So always understand such articles keeps appearing in the newspaper every now and then. You know why? Because always you can see that at times they increase such GST councils are very important. So I think we have already discussed it many times, and you should, if you do not know, make sure that you find out the answers. What is the GST council? And what are the important aspects regarding that? And it also brings us to an important thing that they take some decisions always. So whenever you see the newspapers, you see that whatever things that happens in the councils, the important provisions or important discussions definitely get in the newspaper. So we need to get an idea on all those things. So let's quickly apply the IAS filter and find out the most important points of this editorial. So first of all, we need to have a clarity on the tax ambiguities. What do you mean by ambiguities? There are still many things which are not clear. So first of all, we need to clear the ambiguities. So number one, GST councils addressed a long-standing tax treatment ambiguity. So there is no clarity, non-clarity regarding what? A taxation system, especially when you see the tax on corporate and personal guarantee for bank loans. So very, very important. So this is something the GST Council is actually in discussion regarding the corporate and personal guarantee for bank loans. There is a tax, yet there is during the recent meeting. So these things have been unresolved in the introduction in 2017 when GST was introduced in 2017. These areas are still undecided, and it is actually not having clarity. So this is one important thing to please remember: tax on corporate and personal guarantee for bank loans. So like this, there are many other things that we need to discuss. And next is tax reductions and exemptions. What about the tax reduction and the exemption? So the council decided to reduce the council reduced the GST rate of what? On molasses from 28% to 5% to lower cattle feed cost and improve cash flow for sugar mills. So this was actually to try to help the sugar production and to lower cattle feed to the farmers, to the dairy farmers, to reduce the cattle feed. It was decreased from 28 to 5%. So they also clarified another important thing, which is called, what do you mean by ENA? So please remember, this can be a question for the prelims also. Which are the following are some of the features or uses of ENA or extra neutral alcohol? And they clarify the tax treatment of extra neutral alcohol. It is used for alcoholic beverage, ensuring it is not subject to GST. So they want that it is not subjected to the GST. They clarify the tax treatment of ENA used for not subject to GST. So what is the use of ENA? Have a good thing idea about all those things. And the next important topics regarding is, what about the GST compensation cess? This is again an important area that you should definitely know. What do you mean by a GST compensation cess? So this is a big concern, and the future of GST compensation cess was originally, why it was created? It was originally introduced to do what? To compensate states for the revenue losses during the initial years of GST implementation. So whatever, it was actually in favor of the states. So during the initial year of implementation, whatever losses that will come, it will actually be compensated. That is the compensation cess. So the pandemic led to an extension of this cess. So they even extended it by 2026 due to the pandemic. And what happened is the government is considering the type of surcharge to replace it. So we do not want the cess, we want surcharge. So please, all the economic students, I really hope that you know what is the difference between tax, what is the difference between a tax, what is the difference between cess, levy, and even surcharge. So what are the difference between things? I think you should definitely know this. And we need a broader GST reform. since there are many things are not having proper taxation system, the rates are different. So having a broad GST, so specific tax issues, the editorial clearly says that we need to have a comprehensive reform plan for the GST regime. You need to have a very comprehensive reform. What do you mean by that? Like rationalization of complex multiple rate structures. You need to rationalize everything. You need to have multiple rate structures are presently there. So, and bringing previously exclude. So one is the complex multiple rate structure is the challenge. You make them, rationalize them, and bring back excluded items like electricity, petroleum, alcohol into a much more better GST framework. So this is regarding the important things that this article talks about. So know about the various concepts of this article from GS paper 3 perspective. Okay, quickly moving on. Next is GS paper 2. It's from the perspective of international relationship. And this article talks about the UN Security Council, again written by Dr. Shashi Tharoor. So what is the summary of this article? What is the article talking in detail? So use this from the perspective of GS paper 2. So immediately go and apply the IAS filter. Let's apply the IAS filter and see what does the answer, what we have to. So number one, it talks about UN reform. The article clearly says that the United Nations should be reformed. What should be reformed? Many things, the functioning of this, the structures of it, and even the most important UN Security Council should be reformed. So let's see how. So the ongoing session of the UN has reignited the discussion about the fundamental reforms. We want to bring the fundamental reforms in the organization, and how effective and how relevant is the UN right now. That is also an important thing that we should understand. So how effective and how relevant is the United Nations right now is something we have to understand. So it talks about the Security Council stalemate. So the primary focus of the reform discussion is actually on the UN Security Council, because a lot of critics are criticizing the factor that the 5 permanent members of the UN, the 5 permanent members, China, France, Russia, UK, and the US, are no longer serving purpose as a guarantor of the world security. So you can take this, whether it is China, whether it is France, whether it is Russia, UK, and the US, all of them have their own problem. China's expansion, France's activities in Europe and even in Africa, Russia, Ukraine war, the UK, the US. So the article says that they are no longer the guarantor of world security, and they have become the battleground for political issues. So the article says that we should relook of the 5 permanent members. We should actually relook at that perspective. And the next important things regarding that is the inequity and the obstacles to reform. So it is the obstacle to reform. It is not easy to reform the UN. You can reform anything, but it is not easy. You know why? Because the council structure, we have the existing the Security Council structure still goes back to the 1945 when it was created. That is the reason why it says it reflects the geopolitical realities of 1945, means it is an old thing and is not representative of the world today. Any amendment to the UN Charter would require, 2/3 majority of the General Assembly and ratification by 2/3 member of the state, just like in Parliament we have. So it is going to take a lot of effort. Just imagine UN, how many members in UN, the countries, 2/3 majority of General Assembly and 2/3 ratification by the member states. So that makes it very, very difficult. But definitely we need a council reform. And also see that many countries have competing interests and historical rivalries. This is true. Many countries have, they are competing with each other, and they have historical rivalry, like North Korea doesn't like South Korea, America doesn't like Cuba, likewise India never like Pakistan. So there are many historical rivalries. So the desire for permanent seats, particularly, so many countries apart from the 5 permanent members, like countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, are also trying to get the 5 permanent membership seats. So definitely everybody wants that position. So reforms are not easy in one room. And next is the ongoing gridlock. The lack of reform affects Security Council's effectiveness. If you do not reform this, it is actually affecting the effectiveness. And you can see in the case of Ukraine, where a permanent member's veto power hinders resolution. So you know that the permanent members do have the veto power. If UN wants to take a resolution, say if UN want to take a resolution A permanent member can even veto that. You can take a resolution, say resolution X, you can veto it and say that it is not going to work, you will not work this. So such things needs to change. Reforms needs to bring many of these changes, like just in what happened in Ukraine's case. If there is a war, UN should actually, the veto power, everything should actually be taken away. And it is not only UN, even in the World Bank and International Monetary Fund such problems exist. And take the importance of United Nations. So despite the various flaws, you should always remember that this is the only platform, it's a global platform that is bringing countries together. So there is a need to prevent the organization from fading into ineffective and irrelevant. Do not make sure that UN does not become ineffective and irrelevant. So that is the core crux of this article that it was trying to talk. And let's take three important questions at this point. What are the key challenges and concerns regarding the current structure of United Nations and its Security Council? Why has the reform of UN Security Council been a long-standing issue, and what obstacle hinders its progress? Again, this, how does the inequity in representation within the Security Council impact its effectiveness and the ability to address global challenge and conflict? So three important questions. Try to find the answers to this. So let's quickly move on to the next important topic is Modinomics failed to buck the trend. So you can read it from the perspective of GS paper 3 economy again. So it talks about India's GDP growth rate. The article basically talks about India's GDP growth rate and what is the growth rate of India. Generally, what is the growth rate of India? And to some extent, I think the article clearly is actually criticizing the government's economic growth. So whenever you get such articles, the first thing that you should remember is we are not engaged in a direct confrontation with the government. We should not outrightly criticize the government activities. We are not preparing to become a politician. We are preparing to become a civil servant. So unless and until asked, always try to see, definitely we should see the negatives and also look at the positives. So blame gaming, the blame gaming with a particular person that Modi was not good. So I think as civil service aspirants writing the examination, do not go into the politicization of the angle, but look at the negatives and positives, and always suggest the negatives and solutions and way forwards for that. So please remember that thing. So apply the IAS filter and quickly take the important points that we want to discuss. So roughly discussing the major points, okay? So the focus on India's economic growth. So the article clearly says that since 2024 general elections are coming, the government is trying very intensely to push the economic growth, because economic performance is definitely going to be a big thing in the coming elections. So intense economic growth is one thing, and the growth trend in India. You can see that the India's GDP growth trend since 1950, and you comparing pre-COVID growth rate, before COVID growth rate, you can see that India's growth rate increased was only seen in 2000, indicating a lack of significant growth acceleration. So this is purely the perspective of the writer, and whether the article says that India's growth rate increased only in 2000, and after that it has not grown up, it has not seen a growth acceleration. This is something that we have to individually also analyze. Just because the editorial said that doesn't mean that it is right. But the editorial say that the growth acceleration of India is very slow. The keyword is growth acceleration is slow. So probably that is an important input. Impact of demonetization. So it is also said that the demonetization has also led to slow economic growth. Impact of demonetization, it has also led slowing and recovery after COVID-19. So when you actually evaluate that, the GDP growth rate based on pre-2019 trends, it is revealed that the actual GDP in 22-23 is 11.1% less than the predicted. So after COVID and the recovery, so it is 11.1% lesser than the predicted. So 2022-23 GDP is going to be lesser than the predicted one. So definitely this brings us that the growth acceleration of the economy is slow. So that is what the article is saying. And again, impact of COVID-19. So you can say that Indian economy contracted significantly during the COVID-19 of 2021, with, you can say that most of the BRICS countries and the United States contracting less than India. So during the COVID time, say every economy actually went down. Every economy went down, or every economy actually contracted. But you can say that the article says, comparing it with the BRICS and United States, India's down, or the contraction was much more higher than the other countries. So the government also, the government's reluctance to provide a substantial macroeconomic stimulus. So the government did not even give a macroeconomic stimulus. So what do you mean by a stimulus? I think in economy you must have read about this. If you do not know that, there are different type of stimulus, like the monetary stimulus. In economics, you must have read about the monetary stimulus or the fiscal stimulus. So basically, you want to create more money. So monetary stimulus is like the RBI, the banking, they will cut down the interest rate so that more borrowing can be taken, more money is actually spent. Fiscal stimulus is like government will cut down the taxes. It will decrease the taxes so that people will have more disposable money, and even government will also start spending, pumping in the money. So different type of stimulus, fiscal stimulus. You must have heard about deficit financing, etc. So you government, and so different type of stimulus, etc. And the shift in economic policy, the government has increased capital spending in response to its limited success in stimulating private investment. So the article say that the government has failed. The government could not generate private spending. So the government could not encourage private spending. So the government could not encourage the privates, get the private spending. So in what is government trying to do? The government on the other hand is trying to increase its capital spending. The government is increasing the capital spending, not since it is not got from here private. So previously, government has said minimum governance, and maximum governance. So minimum government intervention and getting maximum governance. But the article says that since it has not generated much from the private, so the overall boosting of the economic growth is actually being done by the government, because it is capitally spending very high. The government is spending very high to boost economic growth before the elections. So this is one article, the one point. So the general analysis questions the Modi government's economic growth rate. So definitely let's not get into the political aspect of that, but take the important lessons, some of the statistics which we have learned. Always make sure that you take the lessons, take the values that we have taken from the editorial, and let's not get political. Okay, so that was regarding this important thing. And moving on to the next important editorial is women's quota, rhetoric and reality. So this talks about GS paper 2, the role of women, and even GS paper 1. Again, you can say society, the women's empowerment, and so you can club it in GS paper 2 and GS paper 1 and read it from the women's reservation bill. So let's quickly understand what does this bill really talk about. Apply the IAS filter here. Let's take the brief summary. So the conditions required for implementing women's reservation bill. So passing the women's reservation bill in India was actually attached to its implementation. What? To put the legislation into effect, a census followed. We need to have a census, and even a delimitation is to be followed. So that is the biggest negative which people say. Women's reservation bill, when if you can pass it, make sure that it is happening from next year. But even the parliament, even the legislature, actually very sure, and the legislature and the parliament clearly said that we need to have a clarity on you need to have a census clear, and we need to have a delimitation. So what is the point of having this when we will not have women's reservation bill, or the women's reservation coming into action right now? So that was a problem. And gender disparity in Indian politics. So also remember that the underrepresentation of women are still underrepresented, with only 15% in the Lok Sabha and 12% of Rajya Sabha seats are occupied by women. So that is actually way below the standards. So only few women, and India ranks about 141 out of 185 in the global gender gap report. So this is the performance rate of the Indian women. And the controversy over delimitation. The delimitation is the process of defining electoral constituencies. You delimit the constituencies when these are going to be the electoral constituency, and you can actually delimit this. This is the area you can actually you delimit certain areas, so that defining electoral constituencies is very important. Has been a contentious issue in India, definitely. Who gets the number of votes, which is going to be the important area, constituency, how many constituencies will get, how many seats will you get, the state get. So everything, delimitation is a very, very burning topic. And with concerns about delimitation had been postponed since 1976 and is now expected to take place after the 2026 census. So this is again seen as a negative. Why should you need that? So it's still now, after 1976 it is postponed. Delimitation or defining the electoral constituencies is not happening. It is, we need to have it after 2026. So this is again a negative, according to many of the political analyst people. And what about the north-south divide that has been discussed here? So the demographic divide between the north and south India, and the analysis clearly say that the South Indian states are managing the population more effectively than the North Indian states. So why do you believe that the North Indian states and the South Indian states, when you have a clear-cut comparison, you see that the South Indian states are managing the population more effectively. So the proposed delimitation could impact the distribution of political powers and resources between these regions. So in this context also, delimitation is really, really important. So again, going into the women's reservation versus delimitation, linking women's reservation to the uncertain delimitation process, so delimitation is not happening anytime soon, was a legislative mistake according to the editorial. It emphasizes the criteria, purpose and process of the women's bill differ from those of the delimitation. So furthermore, reservations for women in local bodies established in 1993 were not tied to the delimitation. So this point is very important. If you want to bring the women's reservation bill, imagine in 1993, reservation in local bodies for the women was not tied to the delimitation. It has nothing to do with the delimitation. But then why do you have this delimitation now is the question that the editorial asks. So don't you think that when you link women's reservation to an uncertain delimitation process, don't you think the purpose and essence of bringing reservation to women is actually getting postponed? What is your view on that? Because it is actually, if you want to bring women's reservation, women's reservation, it is actually tied with what? It was actually tied with an uncertain delimitation. This is tied, just like you actually intertwine this. This is tied with delimitation. So it is actually giving an important mention of Antonio Gramsci's idea. The editorial expresses pessimism about the future of women's reservation in Indian legislature because it is getting delayed. But we should definitely feel that it will definitely come. So let's be very optimistic on that. The article says it is pessimistic, and it is also compared Antonio Gramsci's idea of pessimism of the intelligence and optimism of the will. So it was actually linked to that statement. So let's be optimistic on that. And moving on to the next important editorial, do Delhi's migrants approve the idea of remote voting? So this also brings us the important concept. Again, GS paper 1, there are various issues of urbanization, migration, and also an important concept of GS paper 2, where polity and governance is also important. So what is this idea of remote voting? What is the idea of a remote voting? I think you must have heard about this concept of remote voting. So do you agree to this concept of remote voting is another important question. So let's apply the IAS filter, and let's take the most important brief points. And you can see that have a basic idea. The Election Commission has proposed a RVM, or remote electronic voting machine, or RVM, which will allow the domestic migrants to vote in national and regional elections. So just imagine that. What will it do? It will allow the domestic migrants. So you know that Delhi is a place where there are migrants like people from UP, people from Bihar, You can find a lot of people in Delhi. So taking an example of Delhi, so it will allow the domestic migrants to vote in national and regional elections. Just because you see that if it is election happening in Bihar, you can see majority, most number of Bihari people are, imagine that they are working in Delhi. So what happens is, during the national and regional elections, what about the number of vote? See, even there is imagine that what happens is, even there is a, imagine the 100% total target audience, or the people who are vote. Most often we see that the people who come and vote are just 67% or say 70%, or so what happens is majority, or when you actually count that in number, crores of people, at least the number comes in crores of people are not voting. They are not coming to vote. So how can you actually increase the number of people who will be voting? So just imagine, RVM is a modified version of the EVM. So it's a modified version of the EVM. So there will be a special remote polling booths would be set up in different states when elections are on the home of migrant states. So imagine that special remote polling booths would be set up in different states during the election time. Uh, During the elections are on the home state of migrants. When there is an election happening in the home state of the migrants, separate special remote polling booths will be conducted, and the RVM will handle multiple constituencies from a single remote polling booth. From a single remote polling booth, you'll have multiple constituencies, and apart from fixed ballot paper sheet, if you'll not have a fixed ballot paper sheet, the machine will be having an electronic dynamic ballot display. So apart from, even just imagine, multiple constituencies can be handled from a single booth, and you will have an electronic dynamic display that will represent different candidate lists corresponding to the constituency number of the voter, read by constituency card reader. So it's a good, it can be a good initiative, and definitely there are challenges in a country like India. It's not as easy. So let's this is what is called as remote electronic voting. And let's take an example from Delhi, and the migration demographics in Delhi. It provides insight into demographic. So most migrants come from where? Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. And why do they come? Employment opportunities are better, so that is the reason, main reason for relocation. So this is also a challenge for migration and also a challenge for urbanization. And what about the electoral participation? So there is a survey which has been done, and a majority of migrants from UP and Rajasthan have lived in Delhi for over years, and from Bihar often engage in seasonal migration. So Bihar migrations are often seasonal, and it also highlights that migrants are more likely to participate in national and state level elections. So these elections are big, national and state election. They actually want to participate than the local elections. So that is a important thing, that is talking about the migration dynamics. And what is the trust that people have in the RMB, or the remote voting machines? So as per the survey, it said that 47% tend to trust the system, while 31% do not trust this remote voting system. And when you actually compare it, when higher educated individuals among the migrants from West Bengal expressing higher trust levels. So you can actually come up with another correlation that in the case of migrants, people with education, people with you can see people with higher education, or education is high, they actually trust the remote voting more. This is actually a analysis. And the Election Commission of India has shelved this idea. They have actually put it on the back burner. They have shelved the idea of introducing remote electronic EVMs due to lack of support from political parties. The political parties are not giving that support, and definitely you can see that technology can make voting easier, but it should be complemented by civic education and deep understanding of democratic values. So this is an important statement also. So increasing electoral participation alone may not be the best thing to strengthen democracy. So do not always feel that you can actually increase the electoral participation. Only increasing the participation may not strengthen the democracy, and technology cannot make election process easy in that scale also. Let's discuss three important. So I think this was the same question of the UN. So I think we have come to the I think the same questions here. Yes, we have come to the end of the important editorial sessions. So please do subscribe to our channel LearnStroke IAS classes by Arjun, and keep listening to other important editorial analysis and summary for current affairs for UPSC 2024. Thank you so much.